Economically, we ascend towards disaster as this economy is headed for a deep recession. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. Let's get into some of this humor. First, the Dow Jones Industrial Average hitting approximately 18,000 points. Let's pop the champagne and let's celebrate. Let's chant USA, USA. Everything is just fine and dandy in the system. But let's actually take a deeper look and realize how fraudulent that is, because that's exactly why you're here. Let's look at oil. That's a big news right here out of Reuters. Exclusive new U.S. oil and gas well. November permits tumbled nearly 40%. Oil is the big talk of the town right now as it continues to decline in price. And with any commodity, there are supply and demand fundamentals. So right here, we have a major decline in the permits because as the price goes down, it becomes less profitable. And I'll get into this in a moment right here. Let's skip on to this. Another Reuters article. It's saying global oil and gas exploration projects worth more than 150 billion are likely to be put on hold next year as plunging oil prices render them uneconomic. Data shows potentially curbing supplies by the end of the decade. Of course, prices are going to fluctuate in between now and then, but it's basically saying that these projects are going to have to go on hold for now. We see this also with many other commodities. When they become too expensive, then it affects the economy in one way. When they become too cheap, it affects the economy in another way. And we keep having this up and down, this swinging action. It is very normal in many instances, but let's go on to what they said. As big oil fields that were discovered decades ago begin to deplete, oil companies are trying to access more complex and hard to reach fields located in some cases deep under sea level. This is what I've talked about in my book, basically saying that a lot of that easy oil that comes from certain areas like Saudi Arabia and others is in fact depleting. This is something that they're concerned about. So of course we have to go into areas that are unseen and typically wouldn't be used. But here they are, and it is very expensive. So if the price of oil is down, it doesn't make sense for them economically. It's just not something that they would do. So let's get into this right here. And it's basically showing you consumer credit growth. And overall, it has been on an uptrend. Of course, the chart only shows you from the financial crisis. But what I wanted to say about consumers is that overall, yes, they have been buying their iPods and iPhones and everything, but when you look at how many people have been moving from purchasing property into rental properties, for example, you see that there is a big decline in how much people can actually afford. And then when you see that the fact that their debt, student debt, credit card debt, is at the highest it's ever been on average, we know that the consumer is strapped. There are things out there that do not make sense, do not correspond, do not correlate with the stock market price. I'll get into why, I believe this is one of the reasons why, but I'll save that for a minute. Let's just look at this. We look at the jobs numbers that they continue to put out in the mainstream media, and I look forward to seeing these numbers every single time they put them out because I need a good laugh in my day. I need a little bit of humor too. This information is quite dark, so let me bring that comedy to you right now. Let's look at this. They said there were a few 100,000 jobs created, but let's look right here at the real news. That big headline number translated into just 4,000 more working Americans. Wait a second. Obama and all of the rest of the administration have said that everything's fine. The jobs are increasing. They're getting more jobs. How can this possibly be? Well, what they said was essentially that there were at the same time another 115,000 on the unemployment line. That disparity can be explained when through the expanding labor force it grew at 119,000 and then so on and so forth. And essentially what we're saying here is that the full-time jobs declined by 150,000, but they increased the amount of part-time positions. So of course, when people lose their full-time work, whether it's because of Obamacare or other reasons, they're forced to become part-timers. But what if a part-timer takes 2 or 3 jobs or 4 jobs? Well, that skews the numbers around, and that's the way they've been doing this. This is how I'm going to show you, continuously show you every time they do this, and I will explain to those who don't know how fraudulent fraudulent this really is. I'll continue to show it every single time. Let's look at the unemployment rate, even taking the government's own numbers. This is from my book, but it's a chart that I've put together through the information from the BLS, and essentially shows you the U3 and the U6 number. Now the chart is a little bit outdated by now, but it's essentially the same. What we look at here is their U3 number, and that's the worst, the complete inaccuracy in their data. But then we look at the U6 number. Those individuals who have not been working for a year or more, essentially, they are able to be pushed off the official statistic that is reported to the mainstream media, and we see a significantly higher number that in fact is continuing to increase in many ways. The public really isn't getting any jobs; they're just falling off the statistics. Pretty sad. So that's one of the type of graphs that I have in my book, just showing you the reality. And this right here, once again, I've showed this before, but it's brand new data. Labor force participation remains at 36-year low. We're looking at a time where there hasn't been this many people working, and this is the way they skew the statistics. They show you a unemployment rate. They could put it down to 3%, and everyone would celebrate with that champagne in the USA chant because everything is just fine according to them. But when you look at the actual real statistic that matters, labor force participation, you see a 36-year low. Pretty amazing the way this is done. Now, why exactly do people have this mentality? Why are they unable to see the reality of the situation? Well, if you read a book by Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, it gives you some insight as to what is really happening here. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and say that everything in this book is necessarily exactly the way it is today, but I just wanted to note and touch on one specific point. If you read the book, or perhaps you've watched a movie, it is incredible the way to look at it, and you see different classes of people, and you see one thing that is very interesting, that anytime anyone gets upset, even the slightest little bit, some little frustration, they take a pill which is called Soma, and that makes them feel good. And there are other things in that book, but let's just get into this. They take the Soma, and it's essentially a drug which is what we have today, antidepressant medications and all sorts of other types of Prozac, Xanax, and all these other things. So let's look at this right here out of the New York Times. A glut of antidepressants. 1 in 10 Americans now takes an antidepressant medication. Among women in their 40s and 50s, the figure is 1 in 4. And I've seen actually statistics higher than this. But let's just go with this. What I believe is that partially we are being inundated with these medications like this, and it is really disturbing the public. But it's not just that, it's the type of foods that people are eating, it's the propaganda from the mainstream media. They have the normalcy bias, and in many instances actually suffer from Stockholm syndrome. These are things you need to look up if you don't know what they are already. But essentially there are many different reasons why we have this full spectrum dominance that we are not really looking into. They're looking at the stock market, and they just look at the points going up and down. They look at the 200-day moving average, they look at the 50-day, and they look at relation to how it was 5 years ago and how it is today, and that's all they need to know. They just look at these numbers and they trade stocks based on it. But that's not the real thing. We need to look deeper into it. What about this information right out of the BBC? And it said Prozac found in the drinking water. This is right out of the BBC back in 2004, but you can see this brand new information. I actually unleashed it here at it's been a few videos back now, but even in Ontario, they test the drinking water here local to me in Ontario, and they find every type of pharmaceutical drug in the water supply. And this affects the mentality of individuals who, most of them, are drinking out of the tap, drinking the different types of bottled water, and they're not realizing they are being poisoned and medicated by the big pharma. This is pretty amazing when you look at it. Something, other different way to look at things, taking the crystal ball, flipping it around and looking at it from the other side. We need to analyze far deep into this, not just looking at the stock market price, because it is in fact very dangerous to do so. If you found this video informative, please give me a thumbs up, and don't forget to become an insider. The Insiders is where I give out all my best intel for free. That is available at themoneygps.com. You scroll down to the bottom, fill in your email address, and you get occasional emails from me with good, short, concise info.